This is the Open University.
Well, what a difference a week makes. I like my album now, which I didn't last time I spoke to you. I was kind of thinking, where is this going to go, and what's this about, and why is it so dark? And now it's probably not any less dark, but it's more. It has its identity now because we're 7 songs in. In a week more. And I told you last time about the first couple of tracks. The first one was it's called Smudge, and the album's now called Smudger. Kind of sounds a bit like Lodger, being made in Berlin. Well, Lodger was made partly in Switzerland and New York even, but Lodger, an important, probably my favourite Bowie album in terms of it being the most postmodern and the most eclectic and kind of confused and experimental album, and also the most Eno-esque of Bowie's albums. So that has a lot to recommend it to me. At the same time, there is this, talking about zeros and ones last week, there's this kind of zero sense that he's run out of ideas, and these new aleatory processes he's using to generate song ideas, like using backward tapes of all the young dudes and Move On and that kind of thing, is a kind of a warning sign of what his 1980s is going to look like. It's made in 1979. He's about to embark on his most profitable commercial period, but also his least profitable artistic period. So there is a warning in there. But I think also what appeals to me about Lodger is that it reflects the kind of aleatory, in a geographical sense, lifestyle that he and I both have or had, both of us in the past tense now, unfortunately. But also, he's at his most Japanese. He was about to move to Kyoto. There's a guy called David Kidd, I think he was called, who was showing him around Kyoto and encouraging him to buy a house, a machiya, in Kyoto. And there is that Bowie he spent a lot of time in Australia, actually, in the 80s. But he could have spent all that time in Japan, and that he would have been more my kind of Bowie. I mean, he's already... Yeah, there are a lot of different Bowies out there. Everybody's got their own. Put your own idea of David Bowie here. But that's always... So it's an album... Smudger just sounds vaguely... I was possibly going to call it Todger, actually, and have the same typography as Lodger, because Todger is another word that appears in the first song, Smudge. But that would be a bit... since Todger is a euphemism for you-know-what, I thought that would be a bit too suggestive. I'm obviously getting a bit tame in my old age. Once upon a time, I would have called an album Todger. But also, it's a bit like, hey, I'm a dick. Or it's a bit like, kick me, putting a kick me sign on your bum. It is a dignified record. It's turned out to be mostly piano-oriented or strings-oriented rather than accordion. There is one accordion track. So, yes, I talked about Smudger as kind of a surreal music hall song. Marty Feldman or someone like that might have done a thing like Smudge. It's full of innuendo. I love that 60s innuendo of all those comedy shows like Round the Horn. So it could almost be Kenneth Williams singing Smudge, And but then there's this sense of... There's almost a wispy sense of melancholy in my music, whether it's comedy or not, or a sense of the sinister or the kind of forbidden or libidinal kind of churn which happens down there under the surface. So I think that's what gives my songs a bit of an edge. I think I love comedy, but when I immerse myself in too much comedy, I always feel a sense of nihilism underpinning it, that there's nothing really matters, you can make fun of everything, there is no beauty, people will do anything to get a laugh, and that involves going down to some kind of vulgar areas or areas that don't interest me so much. I mean, vulgarity itself does interest me. So after Smudge I did, and Smudge I was like, okay, this is a start. It just sort of puts a flag in the planet, the new planet 2022, and says, well, I'm working. And it's fun to work, but then if the work's not going well, you think, oh, what's the point? I mean, I think I kind of like it now. I do like it, but it's just a kind of intro. And then the next track was this Peter Grimes, this heavy piano ballad about, being a parallel world Peter Grimes, and killing boys or not killing boys, and feeling guilty or not feeling guilty. but also just the atmosphere. I love the seriousness of Benjamin Britten. I don't like his music very much. The weird thing is, the video was taking kind of weird effects used in a 1969 production of Peter Grimes, with, of course, Peter Pears, Benjamin Britten's lover and partner, singing the role of this possible murderer, double or even triple murderer. It's based on a terrible poem from the 19th century, which I went back and read for the song, or after the song, actually. Really awful, kind of da-da-da-da-da-da rhyming kind of tripe, but Britten takes it into this other area, and as I said before, I think it's because of the psycho-sexual kind of turmoil that he was in. If you look into his life, there were a lot of issues he had there, which he was trying to work out. And in Death in Venice, for instance, in his last opera, you can sort of see the nature of those issues. To me, I really... I just liked the skylarks and the sort of the idea of doing a piano ballad about this rather murky topic, and I like it, but it's not exactly a kind of fun, swinging album opening track. But then I find the sequence works really well the way it is just now. Though you get this sort of light-hearted, almost Rex Harrison number. Instead of "If I could talk to the animals," he's saying "If I could talk to my parts of my anatomy." My lodger, and so on. But then you get this sort of heavy gothic atmosphere of Peter Grimes. And then the third track was Bartleby, which was the first one I was really happy with. I thought, okay, now I'm on track. And Bartleby, what did it begin with? Oh yeah, it also began with Benjamin Britten, because Benjamin Britten did these amazing public information films with W.H. Auden and others.
169 steam trains a week, 44,000 passengers on one Saturday, and 3 million passengers in a year along the steam and steel road to Portsmouth, and the crowds get larger every year.
Firemen, driver, leader, master, wasteman, cure, rolling wayman, hitter, running setter, wasteman, on setter, overman, helper out, inspector, on setter, overman, cure, inspector, banksman, baronet, carter, finger, driver.
There's one about coal, which is fantastic. It also has Benjamin Britten music, which I love. I love much more than his opera music, which is kind of somehow lax and melodic. It's got no hooks. It doesn't have any hooks to my taste. But the more populist, kind of almost jazz-influenced and kind of weirdly percussive and rhythmic music that he did for these public information films. And there was another one, the sort of the Royal Mail one, the famous Night Mail one. David Bowie also ripped off a lot of lyrics when he was making his Let's Dance album. There's all this stuff directly lifted from W.H. Auden. It's not really work, it's just a power to charm, is taken from the Praise of Limestone by Auden. And then there's stuff on the song Ricochet, which is also a direct paraphrase or quotation from the Night Mail song. Mail for people up north, people in. So both Auden and Britten, working on those things, were doing, I guess, what they thought was more populist work, and therefore it's sort of more commercial, in a sense, although it was government financed. So there's a piece of Benjamin Britten music in the Seaside film, which is. It's sort of influenced by, I don't know, it sounds Orientalist in the sense that it sounds like he's trying to do Egyptian music or even Far Eastern music. It's got harps and kind of strange, sinuous clarinets and things in it. So I thought, wow, what a beautiful little thing. I'd love to take some arrangement ideas from that. And it is sort of incorporated, it's sort of the main riff actually in the Bartleby song is this Benjamin Britten snippet, transposed and changed a bit, and with me playing it on my recorders and things like that. But So it set the BPM, you know, there's very slow, I think it's 85 or so. A lot of these songs are very slow, but they're very emphatic. When you do kind of hand claps on a chorus at that slow speed, you get a kind of sarcastic, relentless, grinding kind of feeling. So I really went to town with Bartleby, and I don't know where the idea of Bartleby the Scrivener came from. Obviously I know the short story by Herman Melville. He simply says, I'd rather not. And it's the le trahison des clercs, as they say in French, the treason of the clerks. It's somebody who is literally a clerk, a scrivener, someone who writes documents in a big office saying, well, I'd rather not. It's not a big refusal. It's not like going postal and shooting everybody. It's just saying, well, you know, I'd rather not. A very gentle refusal, which I think really resonates now, because a lot of us are feeling the futility of work. We've been working from home. We've been sort of, you know, our kind of the possibilities of working have changed, and the rewards of working seem much less when we're threatened by an existential threat, possibly fatal disease. So I think Bartleby the Scrivener, it's also very much about that when you sign up, you know, then when they change, the first line is, so here you come again with new terms of service, updating terms of service. And of course, whenever you get those messages from the platform social media companies, you know it's bad news. They're not going to protect your privacy or give you less advertising, anything like that. They're going to find new ways to shaft you, basically. So it's really about waving the finger at capitalism at a time when it's failing. You know, it's certainly slipping quite badly. Saying, you know, you claim you can still deliver things, you can still give us the services you gave us before, but, you know, the lifestyle that you promised and the consumerism you promised, and not just because of COVID and Brexit and supply chain problems resulting from those things, you know, Marks and Spencer's in Paris closing down, British things becoming impossibly expensive and inaccessible, etc., etc. But it's also because of climate change and a general sense of dissatisfaction with the system. So Bartleby is really, you know, I'm not going to be your bloody scrivener. I'm not just going to sit here scribbling away in your office anymore. I'm thinking more about why I'm alive. I'm only alive once. Do I really want to have a job in that old-fashioned sense and just sit there scrivening and justifying, you know, working for your system, which is so unjust? Justifying the unjust. So Bartleby really worked well and really resonated and got the kind of responses that I was hoping for. And that was the first really successful track. And then after that I did this track called Pesky Blighters, which I don't know where that started. It's the only track where I've really gone back to the sort of serial music, the minimalist accordion style, not serial, minimalist accordion style of kind of Steve Reich and Philip Glass and that kind of thing. More Steve Reich this time, because it sounds very much like music for 18 musicians again, where just the way that the vocal, the backing vocals, you know, and the kind of the mallet instruments and things, giving that kind of sense of almost Balinese music or Javanese music. You can hear the gamelan influence very strongly in Steve Reich, along with this math rock kind of, or math. Obviously it goes back to Terry Riley in C. I think that was really the first of those compositions, which just kind of hangs there glistening in the air with a strong rhythm. It's not percussion driven, it's actually instrument driven. So that really, when I broke through to that with the Vivid album, I really I love that sound. So that's the only one. Pesky Blighters is the only track that uses that, and it was really I had in mind a Genesis. I don't like much Genesis, but I had in mind a Genesis song called Carpet Crawlers, which I discovered really just blogging. I had some records in my collection which I'd inherited from a flatmate, and Genesis, The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, was in there amongst them. And so the only track I really loved on that was Carpet Crawlers, just because of the kind of the beginning section of it really more than the end, where it gets a bit overblown. It's a bit long, but I love the mysterious way the chords unfold in the intro section and the way the chorus comes in. Peter Gabriel, he was very interesting in a theatrical way in the 70s. If you look at his kind of stage makeup and utterly bizarre appearance, out-Bowieing Bowie in a sense, because he looks much more strange than Bowie. I remember once I used to hang out with Edwyn Collins in London a lot in the 80s because we were both friends of Malcolm Ross. And Edwyn's wife was always very charming, Grace Maxwell, but Edwyn himself could be very, especially when he was drunk, he could be very sharp in his comments, especially about other musicians. And I don't think he liked my music. He said one day we were in a taxi going back to my flat on the way to his flat, and he said, "Momus, your music reminds me of early Genesis." And I don't think he meant it as a compliment at all. I think knowing Edwyn and his kind of punk rock roots, he would find that the absolute worst thing he could sound like. But and by and large, I'm not in disagreement with him. But I really like a couple of tracks here and there. And Pesky Blighters, it turned out a song about insects. There aren't really, as far as I can see, there aren't really any insects in my kitchen. It's not the season for insect infestation, but it's a fascinating, I don't know, it seems like a reverting to childhood and finding that fascination in the microscopic worlds all around us. I remember I was given a microscope for Christmas when I turned 8, and I used to put little insects from the garden on the slides and look at them, and this amazing new world that opens up for you in the microscopic, a kind of mixture of fascination and horror, which also is relevant and resonant because this album, it's 10 years on from Bibliotech, which was my folk horror album, really, made in Japan, an album I really still like a lot, actually, with songs like Erase and Jackdaw and Dunes, which are kind of walking that line. One of my favourite quotations is Rilke saying that beauty is just the first glimpse of a horror we're still just able to bear. The shiver of the fur, whatever, it's that sense of the mixture of attraction and repulsion, which is often very strong. And it's a line I really like to go to when things are repellent. So I'm, with a long digital nose in the video, I'm kind of enacting this mixture of horror and attraction or fascination. Fascination is a good word because it kind of, you can be fascinated in an awful way as well as a nice way. Pesky Blighters, and it's got that Beatles-ish kind of, the mayhem going on in the background with the backing vocals laughing and making interjections and things like that. So it's a very fun, almost acid trip kind of 60s approach to, wow, I'm on acid and I'm down on my hands and knees looking at a beetle, not that kind of beetle, crawling across the floor, kind of feeling to it. And also it's quirky in a kind of Ivor Cutler or sort of substantial way, which is kind of very me as well. I think I am the inheritor of those people. After Pesky Blighters came Influencer Village, I wanted to write a song about influences. Going back to the Lodger album, I was thinking of DJ. DJ at the time, it was Bowie's kind of critique, just as he would critique the fashion industry with fashion. On Lodger, he's critiquing sort of nascent disco DJ culture. God, so rightly. I mean, I kind of have always hated DJ culture, just sort of, these are the insects of the music world, DJs, because especially here in Berlin, where everybody, at a certain moment, everybody was calling themselves DJ this and DJ that, DJ hell, DJ ineptitude, whatever. And it's just like, I can play records, I must be talented, I can cue up records on a turntable. And he's a very insecure guy. Bowie's DJ is apparently a parody or a kind of pastiche of David Byrne on that song. And, I'm home, lost my job, and incurably ill. And he's sort of asserting that he's got believers. And so, I mean, lines from this keep coming up. I smashed the mirror with my perfume bottle. The influencer is the kind of version of the new DJ. He's got instead of a turntable, he or she has got a a selfie camera, and they're taking lots of selfies. God knows I do this too, so, you know, I am, in my own tiny snail-like way, an influencer, a snail influencer. You know, a very, very unsuccessful one. I'm not even on TikTok or Instagram or these influencer kind of platforms. I'm certainly not making money from being an influencer or being sponsored by Skillshare. Oh, let's take a moment. Have you tried this new course in how to write songs like Momus and fail? This is, I guess, Influencer Village. Musically, it starts from a little scrap of... Oh, yeah, I was watching a video, a Bowie-related video, which used DJ, the song DJ, but put it through ring modulation and kind of pitch software so that it was all on one note. One more weekend of late and evening faces, and it sounded so robotic and Dalek-like, and I thought, wow, that sounds great. It sounds like a rap track, you know, very metallic and brutal, and yet it's also got that disco beat going on in there. And so I just sat down and started reproducing what that sounded like, with the totally taking all the chords out and just making it a kind of chant, a bit like Broken Head by Eno, another track I really like, where there's a grotesque chant, a kind of grotesque Dada chant going on. And it turned into this Influencer Village. I knew it was going to be about influencers because I knew that it was going to be a take on DJ and updating DJ to the influencer era. And so it was indeed, and it was also a bit like Mr. Proctor, a track I did in 2008 with Joe Howe for the Momus album, which was kind of, had these two sections, a very kind of go-ahead punky section, and then a contemplative Anthony Newley-esque kind of section where you're smooching and crooning a different point of view. We talked about this last week as well, having different perspectives in the same song, often with different types of music, different genres of music. I find that very fascinating. So I've got a crooning, a kind of very organic sounding section with recorders and me crooning. It's a bit like the time flies when you're having fun section in DJ, so I'm kind of stealing that really. I love that, you know, he used to be my boss and now he's a poppy dancer. I am a DJ and I've got believers. It's kind of doing that really, but he's saying he's happy being so-so. He doesn't have to, there's this frenetic intensity of the edits per second and the kind of the stretched eyes, and you see it in ambitious YouTubers, and you see it even more on TikTok. People have to get your attention within seconds. They've become much worse than advertisers ever were in terms of just absolute relentless eyeball quest. So the narrator of the song just steps back from that, and, you know, after saying, screaming in a kind of Colin Newman-esque way, screaming about islands off of Africa, all these kind of, you can't even hear the lyrics, but the lyrics are, you know, just digs at the various things that influencers do. You go to Dubai and photograph themselves in front of palm trees or whatever. But then you get this kind of someone just rather lazily saying, I'm quite happy as I am. I don't want to be influenced by you, and I don't want to influence you. Just quite zen, or possibly just lazy. And I think people were amused. It's getting quite a bit of retreat play, so it's influencing people. Then the next track, I thought, okay, let's just, let's make something. I don't know, how did it start? Actually, the next track disappear. I think I just sat down and started playing nice chords into the sort of electric piano sound, which inevitably started sounding very 70s and very Joni Mitchell because they were very jazzy chords. And it's a bit like, because last year when I was working on my album in Athens, Athenian, I was in touch with David Bowie's ex-girlfriend, who just was emailing me just because she was bored in lockdown, and Hermione. And she she would listen to my songs as I was making them, and she would say, well, Davy would have done this differently. She thinks of him as Davy. He would have put more chords in, because I think he was just writing When I Live My Dream when he was with her. It seemed to go through an awful lot of writing that song, and to have more and more chords in it. So if you listen to the very last Dream, it has like 8 chords, When I Live My Dream, and key changes and things in it. So she was like, put more chords in. So I did this, what was it? I think it was Zooming, who came up with a song with a lot more jazzy chords and things. So this was, this year's version, Disappear, and it's, I don't know, it's, what's it about? I don't even know what it's about, and I kind of like that. I like the fact that see what happened, I started making songs that I'm sort of doing the music, and then I'll record each line by line, just kind of whatever comes into my head. A bit like Bowie with Joe the Lion. He apparently was just making it up as he went along, and he'd just get Tony to stop the recorder and he'd write another line. You get up and sleep, the wind blows in your cheek. These would come as with the music, as the music was already there, and you'd just be literally singing it, making it up as he sang it. So I was kind of doing that with some of these songs. The first one was Pesky Blighters. I was really just improvising that line by line, improvising the melody as well. So there's a kind of nice, it's not yet set in stone what the melody is when you do a song that way, and it's also not quite set in stone where the chorus comes and where the verse comes. Again, something Bowie did. A lot of musicians who worked with him, who would give him, backing tracks, they would say, he did something totally different. He didn't put the verse where I thought it was going to be, and he didn't put the chorus where I thought it was going to be. So there's a nice moment in Disappear where there is a chorus that if you'd written it down as a lyric on its own first, you'd probably sing only over certain chords. But the chorus comes in the middle of a verse where I'm kind of wandering through some thoughts, some word association. There's stuff about not being famous enough in there, and then there's stuff about death in there, and the big zero, and that happy birthday then they disappear thing. I think it's taken from a Mary Tyler Moore Show episode where Lou Grant has a surprise birthday party which he hates and leaves, and people are hiding out in the hallway, and they come in one by one as if they're just visiting. So but it's more than the sum of its parts, because the music with the smoochy growl sax and sort of muted sax thing really adds this profundity to these rather nebulous lyrics. And then the video also was shot, it's actually done as a theatre project for Naomi, who does amateur theatre. Had to make a film assignment for her class in Paris when she was in Athens. So we went out to Ellenikon Airport, which we were already visiting as a kind of urban exploration. A fascinating ruined airport which closed in 2001. It's near Glyfada in Athens, down by the coast. I used to fly out there from Athens to getting sent back by my mother to Scotland to boarding school, and it was a very emotional place for me because I loved Greece and I hated Scotland at the time. I hated being at boarding school in Scotland anyway. And so to see it as a ruin, it's not just like the ruins of my childhood, my emotional moments of childhood, but also a kind of symbol of what life after capitalism might look like. And we've had a lot of symbols of that during the COVID era, because we've had deserted cities, we've had empty airports anyway. This is not just empty, but ruined. It's going to be turned apparently into casinos and conference centres and things quite soon. But it's as it stands, it's a really beautiful symbol of the possibility that nature will reassert itself, that even all our kind of horrible infrastructure of roads and airports and things will be overrun by weeds and nature. And we're just a blink, we're a flash in the pan, and we will disappear. The latest track, which I was working, I work so hard on these things, I don't even use my body, so I think I'm going to try and exercise today. But anyway, the latest track called Supervillain, and that's almost like a contractual obligation with myself to make a Bond-esque track, like Parasite, on Vivid and Endarkenment on the Athenian. That was also on Vivid, was it? I think it was. I lose track. So I thought, okay, I have to do the Bond track, and it always has a certain kind of bass line, boom, 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 that kind of bass line, and then it's got these major minor seventh chords, the spy chord, and it's got sort of brass French horns, and but this time, I think that what really makes this one stand out, and I'm very happy with it, is the kind of vocal. The singing of the riff, which goes through the instrumental sections and sounds so 60s. I'm a product of the 60s, although I'm very influenced by the 70s as well. Those are the 2 decades which made me, and everything since then has been a sort of dystopian nightmare, the yuppie and neoliberal nightmare, which has succeeded those 2 really visionary decades. The 70s was a dark version, a troubled version of the 60s, really. It's funny because in France it's called les années 70, so it's still called the 60s, but it's the 60-10s. And it was, obviously there was a lot of terrorism and, 3-day week, the oil crisis, whatever, various strikes, awful industrial unrest in Britain. But it's still, to me, a very inspirational time. I really, the films that marked me when I was a child, in the late 60s, things like The Italian Job, you can hear that. You can hear the Quincy Jones, you can hear the John Barry influence, you can hear the Burt Bacharach. So there's a kind of easy listening, but also spy thriller kind of ambience to it. And that's where we're up to. And now I like the album, and I think it's going in a good direction. It doesn't quite have the rhythmic drive, perhaps, of the last album. It's got some kind of ploddy, slow, apart from obviously influence of Village, is quite mellow and sinister. So perhaps it has more in common with that Bibliothèque album from 10 years ago, and that sense of unease and horror mixed with vitality and the love of life and pleasure. Let's see where it goes from here. I'll be correcting my corrections, and the tracks that I've done so far are finished. They're in the can, they're wrapped. But I'll be correcting the general sense of what the album's about, because there'll always be, I haven't done this type of song yet, I haven't done that type of song yet, or it's much more random really than that. I'll just probably come across scraps of video that have some atmosphere that really appeals to me or fascinates me in some way, or scraps of music which I then can turn into something else. So, see you next time.
Open University.